Next month, Rise of Skywalker hits theaters. In anticipation, I'm reviewing each of the episodes in the Skywalker Saga in release order. This is part 3, so we're talking about Return of the Jedi. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your take on Return of the Jedi. This is where the Star Wars fan base starts to divide a little bit more. The Ewoks, a second Death Star, a lot of people had a lot of issues with that. People like me grew up with all of that, so we were just kind of used to it and kind of accepted it. And we've got a whole new generation of people who enjoy Star Wars movies and have a totally different take from myself and the older generations that first saw it in the theaters. So I'm pretty excited to see the discussion down below in the comment section. With that said, let's get started with the backstory of this movie. For me, the most interesting thing about the backstory of Return of the Jedi is that the movie could have gone in a very different direction. Over the last 10 years, it's been pretty well documented that Gary Kurtz, the producer of Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, and Lucas had outlined a totally different sequel to Empire Strikes Back than the one that we got. And in fact, when things started heading in a different direction, Gary Kurtz kind of went, this probably isn't the right project for me, and decided to go off and do the Dark Crystal instead of producing Return of the Jedi. But he's talked about some specific plot points that were going to be in his version of Return of the Jedi.
Han Solo was going to be killed in a raid. Princess Leia would have to decide in the story to take over the mantle of the leader of her people, or what was left of her people, and therefore go off, or was leaving Luke on his own, I suppose is the best way to put it, to kind of ride off into the sunset like Clint Eastwood does. And it was slightly more bittersweet than what happened.
According to him, after Empire Strikes Back came out, Lucas had a pretty big change of heart as to how he wanted to close out the trilogy and what he wanted to focus on with the story. And, you know, some of this, it's of course speculation. It's one person's perspective from interviews given decades after all of this took place, but according to him, Lucas seemed to be focused a little bit more on trying to set it up to have more action so that they could sell more toys. This has always kind of been the theory about where the Ewoks came from and why they're like teddy bears, and supposedly it's so that they could sell more toys and do a children's cartoon afterwards and some TV movies afterwards. Likewise, he talked about how suddenly Lucas wanted it to be more action focused, and in their original version of the script and treatment that they were working on, there wasn't a second Death Star. And so as Gary Kurtz kind of looked at what he was interested in doing, the types of stories he wanted to tell, which were going to be a bit more character focused, and then Lucas proposed something with the Death Star again, that just wasn't interesting to Kurtz anymore.
It didn't seem like much of a challenge to do another attack on another Death Star and to do things that we'd already done before, rather than take the story off in a different direction.
So naturally, as soon as he started giving these interviews, the internet started to speculate as to whether this would have been a better direction for the film, a better direction for the franchise. Would this have kind of corrected the mistakes and the path that Lucas started to head down with this film that you certainly saw in the prequels? You know, I don't think there's any way of knowing what would have been better without actually being able to see it. He actually summed that up pretty well in this interview.
And the fans argue about this all the time. Whether it would have been any better or not is impossible to tell, because it wasn't made that way. And it would have been probably less out-and-out heavy-duty action and a little more character developed.
So do I think that the Gary Kurtz produced version would have been better or a stronger direction for the franchise in general? My gut instinct is no. There's things about it that I think would have been corrective for the path that Lucas went so heavily down with the prequels later on. And maybe that's to say that if Gary Kurtz would have stuck around, he would have been a better producer to keep Lucas in line. He would have done a better job of saying no to him than Rick McCollum did in the 90s. And I think that would have been a good corrective. But do I specifically think that this was a good direction to go for the story? I don't really think so. Now, granted, I was 2 years old when Return of the Jedi came out, or actually I guess it was 1.5 when Return of the Jedi came out. So by the time I saw the movie, it was established. I was the right age to be like, Ewoks are amazing. This is so cool. So I was raised on Star Wars with this as the conclusion. And this story kind of sets sets the tone of the trilogy in a certain way because of how it closes things out. And that shifts the way you think about these films. If you've always watched the three of them together and it ends on this note, you expect it to have a certain celebratory conclusion to it. And you're used to that as just part of the Star Wars tone and the way these stories are told. So for that reason, for me, I hear what he's saying and it feels awfully dark and out of tone. Like Empire's a dark film, but it was the middle piece, and so this Return is supposed to be the celebratory we won victory third piece of a trilogy. And so I interpret his statements as kind of odd. It would be weird for Han to be rescued and then die in the middle of it, and Luke and Leia just going off alone and kind of in these positions of like, we won, but now I'm stuck in this. Like, that sounds weird the way that he describes it. So I don't think I would have thought it would be better, but I think him sticking around would have made George Lucas a better writer, storyteller, better shepherd for the Star Wars universe. Then moving on from there, we'll start talking about directors. And in fact, their top pick was Steven Spielberg, the person that many of us have always dreamed of telling a Star Wars story. He was one of the top contenders to direct this film, but there was kind of a Directors Guild dispute kind of going on at the time. And George Lucas kind of infamously removed opening credits from the Star Wars movies. You don't see the director's name until the end credits. And the Directors Guild is intended to protect directors so that they get credit. And things like that caused a lot of tension in the movie industry when George Lucas did that. And so Steven Spielberg was kind of on the other end of this situation that was going on. And it almost basically pulled him out of the running, even though he might have been interested in doing it. They would have been interested in doing it. And over the decades, Spielberg's kind of given different answers as to whether he'd want to do a Star Wars movie, if that's like his dream project, or if he would feel like, he's dating his best friend's sister and things like that. For me, I would have loved to have seen Steven Spielberg direct this movie. That's not what ended up happening. David Cronenberg was considered, David Lynch was considered, and they kind of turned it down. And given their types of films that they made, how weird of a movie would Return of the Jedi been if one of those two guys had actually directed this movie. They went with Richard Marquand, and basically, it seems a little bit like George Lucas wanted somebody to direct the movie that was on set, that carried kind of the job of director, but where Lucas could be there on set and make sure that what he wanted happened. There's a lot of rumors that Lucas kind of ghost directed this movie. He did a lot of second unit directing. And so when there needed to be a creative decision, Lucas would make sure what he wanted happened, but Lucas didn't have to be there saying cut every time a scene was shot. He wasn't the person having to talk with actors. And that probably might have been a really nice pairing inside of it for Richard to actually be the guy that has the credit, but Lucas himself still gets to be there and be the person with kind of these creative decisions to kind of make things happen. Then again, Empire is widely regarded as the best directed of the original trilogy, pretty much everybody. And Irvin Kershner was not having Lucas being on set trying to guide the direction, and it's the best directed one. So perhaps that's another perspective on it, but just interesting to see how each of these three movies was directed in such a wildly different way that led to very different films with different strengths and different weaknesses. And the final thing that was interesting on the backstory of this film is that the original title of this movie was Revenge of the Jedi. Sometimes people ask me, why do I have a poster that says Revenge of the Jedi? And they're like, it's supposed to be Return of the Jedi or Revenge of the Sith, and your poster's got it wrong. Is that a book out there, or is that a comic book? I'm like, no. This is like a fun little Easter egg type poster that I have. But basically, that's the original title they came up with Luke kind of going out for revenge. And at the time, they were working on Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and they wanted to call it The Revenge of Khan, and then the title got out there that it was going to be Revenge of the Jedi, and so they switched it from Revenge of Khan to Wrath of Khan. And then Lucas went, well, Jedi are supposed to be these peaceful people, and they don't kill people, so they wouldn't be out, or they don't kill people out of vengeance like that. That's a lower motivation. And so let's have him return. Let's not have him get revenge. And so he still has the moral high ground. And so the title shifted at that point in time, in which case neither one, Star Trek or Star Wars, ended up using the word revenge, and both of them kind of became iconic in their own rights. But that's what this is. They actually put posters out for Revenge of the Jedi very early on, and then they had to like scrap all of them because they shifted the title of the movie to be less vengeful inside of it. But this is a nice little deal. I actually picked this one up off Amazon. I think you can still buy them. I have a link down below, kit.com. Link, and that'll take you to a list of my posters that I got off of Amazon, and it is in there. With that said, let's get started talking about the movie itself with the good. And what I think this movie does really well is give you a big slam bang conclusion to the trilogy. It is very action based, but when you come to some of the plot lines about Luke and Vader, it does dive in deep into some emotions, and then you give kind of an answer to the question of, does the rebellion win or does the Empire win? This movie resolves that for you. And I think it works pretty nicely as a movie that gives you these big feelings of satisfaction inside of it. If you've just wanted to see an all-out war in the stars, this movie gives it to you inside of the film, whether you're talking about rescue missions, chases, ground battle, sky battle, saber battle. You get all of them very large scale, and the destruction of another gigantic base, maybe a bit repetitive with that plot point. But you needed something that visualized the victory that they truly had in this film. So you kind of end it and you feel like, yeah, that's a nice bookend for where we started with. They've got these plans. It's a rebellion. It's this ragtag group. And then by the end of it, this little whiny farm boy has saved the universe itself. That's a nice conclusion to this trilogy. Speaking of our whiny farm boy in this film, as I mentioned in each of these reviews, they give Luke a very big arc, and they fill in a bunch of character development very quickly between the movies, where very whiny in the first film, and then he's adventurer guy that's kind of a hero in the second film, loses at the end of it. And he was cocky, he was overly confident and impatient. And then he goes into this one and you see him as this guy that's just kind of embraced the seriousness of being a Jedi in a bunch of different ways. And even some of the stuff they did with it was kind of interesting, because when he's first introduced, he's in all black, and the pig guards go after him. It looks like he's doing like the choke move that only Vader does. And so it even has these implications that he's kind of embracing the dark side a little bit. And little things like that, the colors that he's wearing and stuff that he's doing, you see such a different Luke than even where he was in the third act of Empire Strikes Back, as he is becoming this Jedi that he's been training for all throughout these films. And then very quickly inside of the film, you get him going into action mode and truly see him as the hero. He was such a failure at the end of Empire, and it's easy to forget how good he has become, how powerful he has become, and you see him very quickly just destroy Jabba's forces with his group of people in their little rescue operation. And even in our little beginning sequence in Jabba's palace, you get to see him joke around a little bit with Han as they're captured. Probably should have had a little bit more of jokey rapport Luke throughout the rest of the film. He's so serious. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But they get some little moments where you can see them trying to tile the loose ends of the relationship. The crew's back together. They can have a little bit of fun, even though they're captives about to be thrown into the Sarlacc pit. But speaking of Jabba's palace and our little rescue mission, this whole kind of intro sequence to it, I'll have many thoughts on it when we move into the bad section. As a sequence in and of itself, it's an interesting way to kick off the movie, because we're just seeing our heroes on an adventure that's not really tied to the Empire. Everything else that we've seen has been all these adventures about rescuing princesses and battling Darth Vader and Imperials coming in, stormtroopers. And then we have kind of like this little side mission here to rescue Han, where it's not about the Empire at all. It's just about these space gangsters and the little and other adventures that they could have and have had in these years between the films. That's what this one kind of feels like at the beginning of this film. And I just enjoyed that about it, of you're seeing Princess Leia in on the action in disguise. And, you know, Luke has this plan that he's sending the droids in. Lando's kind of joined in. Bit of a question as to why they didn't tell C-3PO more about what they were attempting to do here and all of that. But at the same time, just as a little episode of an imaginary Star Wars TV show set during the original trilogy, a very cool little 40-minute rescue operation that they pulled off, a great little action sequence as they start just tearing things to pieces, even the sequence with Luke and the Rancor. I mean, you just see him as this powerful, smart, witty warrior inside of this film. And so I just really dug this sequence in and of itself in the context of the movie. I will have more thoughts on it, but a nice adventure I enjoyed having with them. Moving along to the third act of this film, where you get this massive battle on 3 different fronts. For me, the space battle in this film is the best space battle that has ever been put to film. Now, rewatching it last night, there's actually some like still artifacts around some of the ships at certain points in time. So you can see that like the boxes move around the ship. Like, it's subtle, but it's definitely very obvious if you know and you're looking for it. Despite all of its weakness, and actually a little bit of a pause right there. It's baffling to me that they've been re-releasing these movies for 20 years using CGI to correct them, and they haven't fixed that yet. Like, that is the thing that you can do in the special edition that only is an improvement. There's nothing to complain about if you remove a box green tint relic from around a ship. It's only a good thing, and they haven't fixed all of that yet, but we're adding in Vader going, no, 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 as he picks up the Emperor and just goofy stuff like that. But anyway, even though it has some faults inside of it, the staging of the action, the stakes, the way it ties into the stuff down on Endor, I just think it's like they just had the technology to do incredible things, and they just went all hands on deck to come up with great like shots of, you know, 2 ships next to each other and a fighter flying between them and ships crashing into things, Millennium Falcon flying through the middle of the Death Star. All the pieces to it just come together so nicely. Even just that Lando is kind of one of these lead guys inside of it. And so we're seeing the battle from his perspective, along with Akbar as, you know, the guy watching in command of everything. It just works for me because there's so much passion on screen and how just trying to make something incredible, and that you're watching them do the absolute best that was possible at the time, that no one had done anything to this size before. They just kept upping the ante from what you saw in Star Wars and then the Hoth battle in Empire Strikes Back. And then it's like, let's do as big of a space battle as you can imagine. And I mean, I just think it's just, obviously, I dig it. I think it is the best. And the runner-up to me is the Rogue One space battle. And then it's just like a distant for everything else that's ever been done in regards to space battles. Along the same lines with our final battle in this one, you have the showdown between Luke and Vader. That I think is just a sequence. That sequence is the reason that it makes it so difficult for me to even know what to make of the Gary Kurtz comments on what they wanted to do with things. Like, would we still have this? Was it a totally reimagining of everything? Because this sequence, the Luke Vader battle, I mean, it's just a cool fight in and of itself. And then, you know, Emperor gets in with the lightning hand, so iconic. And then Vader returning to the light side in his final moments. Powerful, powerful stuff. But beyond that, the character arc, the wits, the morals, and all of it between Luke and Anakin, really, and Luke and Vader in another sense, and the Emperor, between all of them playing them against each other. That sequence is so potent in light of the revelations that you reinterpret everything in the previous movies in light of this sequence. And in light of what they do here, suddenly these movies stand for everything that they were before, but they're also about the redemption of Anakin. That was not the case until this sequence, until this film, as they establish all these pieces. It reframes everything that you've seen inside of these movies up to this point in time. And then, of course, they're reframed again once you get the prequels, and it makes it very obvious that this is about the redemption of Anakin. But that kind of boils down to these sequences. They work, they land, you buy into the battle of souls as well as the battle of sabers inside of the sequence. Therefore, you can reframe all of them, and it feels satisfying once you have the conclusion, the choices that Anakin makes. And that's kind of at the heart of real drama, is the choices that our characters make in light of the journey that they've been on. So you see Luke go on this journey where he's been tempted to join the dark side and try and overthrow the Emperor, and maybe they will rule as father and son. And then you see Luke maybe using some dark force powers at the beginning of this movie. And then you see him using rage when Vader taunts him, speaking about his sister, and Vader's reading his mind and knows now who Leia is. And so then Luke turns and uses rage. And then after he's chosen to use rage and anger, when he realizes that he's repeating the patterns of his father, he pauses and makes a different choice. The light side does not do this, and the light side does not win by doing this. I'm a Jedi. I am not going to repeat his patterns. And if I die in this moment, I am not going down that path. I will not kill him. Boom. He makes a choice. So the Emperor makes his choice. So he's going to use his lightning powers to take him out. And then Anakin makes a choice himself and turns from like everything that he's embraced for these last 20 years, turns on it, makes another choice to go back to the light side with everything that he has left, and takes out the Emperor inside of it. That's powerful stuff. That's real drama that has emotion to it. And once again, because that lands, because it works, you can reframe all of these movies, going all the way back to Obi-Wan and Luke in a little hut, hearing this backstory. All of this is reframed because of this sequence and all the details we've gotten. This sequence reframes all of it, and we're seeing his redemption. You get that bookend to all of it. And that, to me, is what makes these movies, what makes this movie much better than it could have been, because it has some pretty big faults. We'll get to those in just a little bit. Because of that, I think it fixes a lot of mistakes of the film. But in general, it closes things out really nicely. That is, I started talking about that. I'm going to close my good talking about that. It ties back to the Vader stuff. It ties back to that space battle being so satisfying that you kind of end on a point in time where you're like, yeah, they won. Yeah, Luke almost went to the dark side, but instead he pulled Vader back with him, and we won in the end because of it. And that, for me, is going to make up for a lot of the issues as I kind of go into my final score after I'm going to be pretty mean to it, and just a lot meaner than I was to the previous two movies that I talked about. But before we do that, let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. First thing I want to talk about here is the Ewoks. I don't hate the Ewoks at all. I grew up on the Ewoks. I grew up actually watching the Ewok movies on, cable television and stuff like that. So they've just always been a part of Star Wars to me. And I think there is a strong defense of the Ewoks. Now, people say they're just teddy bears. It makes no sense that these teddy bears with rocks could beat armored soldiers with blasters and things like that. And there's some truth to that. It does strain some credibility. It does feel a little bit like Lucas. So one of the quotes I talked about in the original review inside of this, how Lucas said that he wrote this one script and then he cut it up into 3 pieces, and how that's not really true, but there's truths inside of it. One of those truths is that the Wookiees doing a battle like this was in one of those original drafts, but it was kind of the Wookiees. They were, 7 feet tall version. And so by the time the 7 feet tall Wookiees make it to this movie, they're now Ewoks. They're itty bitty little versions. So the ideas were always kind of there. But I understand why many people, if you were 15 years old when you saw Star Wars, and then you watch this one at 21 and teddy bears show up, you're like, what on earth is going on? Lucas has gone crazy that these teddy bears would be able to do this. For me, the idea of the primitive culture defeating the more advanced army it's a trope of fiction. It's been done to death over the last 30 years. Actually, after Return of the Jedi comes out, you get Dances with Wolves, you get Pocahontas, you get The Last Samurai, you get Avatar, that famously have these primitive people on horseback or the equivalent of horseback battling big advanced armies. And that's essentially what you see here. That same plot line that took Avatar to $3 billion is kind of inside of this one here, where they team up with the primitives and this big army comes in to take over their planet for their big weapon, and the locals don't want to do that, so they use their primitive weapons and defeat them. So for it, like, Star Wars is not alone in telling this story, or Return of the Jedi isn't alone in telling this story. And, you know, some people could be like, how did they set all these traps? Well, I mean, they established earlier on that they were setting traps and things like that. So I don't think it's as unbelievable. Having them, the exact ones in the right spot, maybe strain some credibility. Could they have done more to establish that these entire woods are a death trap if you're not an Ewok? They probably could have done more to do that. But, you know, if the idea that these creatures that we don't know how strong they actually are, like you think like a 90-pound pit bull is a very deadly dog at 90 pounds that can kill almost any adult if it chooses to, because it's just so powerful. These 100-pound Ewoks, for all we know, are very powerful creatures too that have been setting death traps throughout this woods. So I've never had a big issue with it. I've always gone along with it, and I think there is a defense. At the same time, they are teddy bears. Pretty clearly they were made to sell toys to children like myself back in the 80s. It worked on me. You won me over, George Lucas, with your teddy bears. If you were older, I get where you're coming from. Another mixed one on this one is Han Solo, actually. He, is pretty famous that Harrison Ford didn't want to be in this one. They got him to come back. He wanted to be killed off. They didn't kill him off. And the character just in general feels a lot more, just generic. Like, Harrison Ford is always going to have his swagger and charisma, but the character himself feels much more toned down from the bravado that we got from the previous two movies. He doesn't have much of an arc at all. I mean, it's like he gets rescued and then he's just guy on a mission. There's no specific thing that's interesting about him. He doesn't get any great scenes, really. He doesn't get any of these great memorable lines, really. And so Han Solo inside of it, because he's such a great character, just feels so vanilla inside of this film that if it wasn't Harrison Ford playing him, he'd be just like kind of pretty forgettable inside of it. So, see, he's not bad compared to the other two movies. He kind of is, though, kind of in that mixed category for this one. And the last one, I talked about this a little bit, but Luke feels like a different person. There's a really big gap between End of Empire and what you see here. I mean, even in his battle with Vader, he's like getting mouthy at times, being like, you'll find I'm full of surprises. He's doing stuff like that. And then here, he's just so serious, other than a couple of lines here and there. Everywhere he goes, he's just on mission. He wants information. He's going to convert Vader. And it just kind of chokes the personality out. I love the character arc in the sense of seeing the whiny farm boy turn into the hero of the galaxy, that he's going to save the day and do whatever he has to do, and so confident in what he's doing. I don't like that the personality is all gone. Like I mentioned it in my Empire one, that one of the things that worked about that film is that the whininess now transferred into impatience. Now we just don't see that really. We don't see that side to him that's kind of annoying. It's just gone, and you just have serious guy with very little personality. Probably should have balanced that out a little bit more. I like the arc. I wish he'd been a bit more balanced and they'd found how to have the fullest mature version of Luke in the film that still had personality. From there, let's move on to the bad. And right off the bat, without question, this is the film in the original trilogy that by far has the most problems inside of it. Just on a structure level, incredibly problematic. The whole Han Solo rescue, the Jabba's palace sequence, it feels entirely like a prologue to the movie. They wanted to bring Han Solo back, so you have to have this mini adventure where they do that. This whole sequence that's kind of the first act of the movie But it's not really the first act of the story of this movie. The story of this movie does not kick in until 40 minutes into the film because we have to do this prologue to rescue Han and have a cool action sequence. If this just existed separate and they were like, hey, in 1982, we're going to do a 1 hour Star Wars special that's the bridge between these two movies, it would be a very cool, memorable thing, and then you would have fleshed out the actual story of this movie. But if you look at what is Return of the Jedi about, it's about Luke trying to redeem Vader. It's about the rebels trying to infiltrate a base to get the shield down to blow up another Death Star, and it's about the Emperor having a plan. And he says that pretty clearly in his introductory scene, that like he's got a plan. Like, what is his plan? And then we learn that at the break going into the third act of the film. But you can break the movie down based off of this. The actual first act of this movie is Emperor shows up on the Death Star, which is actually mirrored with Vader showing up at the intro to the prologue to the film. 35 minutes later, same exact sequence, except the Emperor shows up. Yoda and Luke getting this information and realizing what mission he needs to go on, and then the rebels having their plan as their mission. That's act one. It's all kind of the setup for everything. Here's the information you need to have. Now, how are we going to act on it? Immediately, act break is Han leading his team to Endor and them kind of going on their little Ewok adventure. And then third act break happens when it's discovered that this was all a trap. And so we go into all-out war, but rebels are running into a trap and they've been captured. And so then, Ewoks have to rescue them. And so we have our big third act battle. Those are the three acts of the movie. There just happens to be a fourth act on the film. It's a prologue. That has nothing to do with any of that. It's a side mission, not about the Empire, not about the Death Star, not about the plot of the movie. It's not about Vader and redeeming him. It's just the bridge between two movies. And that's structurally a problem for a film when you have a 40-minute introduction that has nothing to do with your story other than rescuing Han Solo and having some fun in the process. Love the sequence. As a piece of this movie, it's weird. It's a weird way to structure your movie. Another issue with the film is the Leia reveal. It just pretty well falls flat. They set up in Empire just a little bit. No, there is another. And so you're like, oh, who is this other person out there? And maybe a little bit in the end of Empire, they kind of indicate Leia's force sensitive. Luke's able to communicate with her a little bit. And there's a mild implication that would mean she's a force user. You go into this movie and pretty well documented based off all the script information we have, the notes that we have, is a very late minute addition inside of it that Lucas was looking for one more kind of twist and turn inside of it. How do we outdo this thing? And there's pictures inside of his notes where he wrote the sentence down as the plot of the movie and then just wrote sister up above it. It was that kind of afterthought inside of it that tries to tie some things together, but you can play this movie out without that twist and reveal, and the trilogy stands. It doesn't need to be there. It's tying things together that don't need to be tied together. It closes out this love triangle in a way that's like, that's weird. Like we had a love triangle, and the fact that we're talking about it as a love triangle, and your resolution is like, yeah, but two of the corners of it are actually brother and sister, so they can't marry each other. Like, that's weird. That is like, and it doesn't even address the fact that like the making a joke of her being like, ew, I kissed my brother would feel out of tone with the humor inside of Star Wars movies, but you also, man, you gotta do something with that one. You just can't leave that one lingering like, oh yeah, we romantically kissed each other in the last movie. Doesn't work well. But even the way that it plays out in the script, where you have Yoda and then Obi-Wan having their conversation on Dagobah, and it's just kind of said. It's just kind of stated. And it's, Luke goes, Leia is my sister. Is like, that's right. Like, this is a odd way to deliver such a big reveal. You do the big reveal for Vader, and you're like, what? Is Vader really his father? And it's this dramatic moment here. Yeah, two guys sitting on a log. Just a guy talking with his ghost buddy. It just kind of comes out. Weird way to do it. And then we repeat the information when, Luke is telling Leia, and once again, it's just like he just kind of tells her, and it's like, all right, think on that, I gotta go. And then we're told it a third time in the end of the film where Han is like, hey, if you want to go hook up with Luke, I'm not gonna get in the way. Once again, in light of the information we've been given as an audience, weird line to put in the movie. She's like, no, it's not like that. I love him, but he's my brother. Like, is incest real common out there? Like, the way it plays out is just weird. It doesn't have the emotional oomph it's supposed to have because we've now had 5 more episodes. That's 7. 5 more episodes that have elaborated on this family line, and then we've, of course, had some of the real power, some of the better moments inside of the 2 Disney episodes are kind of like closing out a little bit of the resolution on these storylines. We're more comfortable with it. It just doesn't really work inside of this movie in and of itself. It doesn't have the punch that it should have. The other movies surrounding it now, I think, give it more punch than it truly deserves as this afterthought that Lucas just kind of went, let's make it Leia the sister. Couple smaller things. The death of Boba Fett is pretty well appalling. If you're going to have by the time this movie was being written, people knew that Boba Fett was kind of this, cult figure of sorts. He'd been in the not special edition, the holiday special, and had gotten a good response. And so he's in Empire, and he's the cool bounty hunter. He's the guy that took down Han. And it's not just that he dies so quickly. It's not just that he dies so quickly in the intro to the movie or the prologue to the movie. He dies a stupid death where it's like, oops, bumped him. He flies, crashes into something, and falls into a pit. It's just bad. There's no other way to phrase it of this isn't interesting. It's not funny. It doesn't play into anything. There's nothing about this. It's just, and then Boba Fett accidentally dies. Oh, well, that was anticlimactic and not satisfying whatsoever, naturally leading to then, 35 years of people being like, is he dead? Did he get out? And then, of course, that, being established in other places that he did get out. And maybe that's what we'll find out in The Mandalorian tomorrow or something like that, the Mandalorian is Boba Fett. Well, who knows what's about to happen. But just a really poor way to take care of a character that was too important to have such a stupid demise inside of it. Another one inside of it, the speeder chase hasn't aged well. The effects that they used, it's like 50% shots that are like, that actually, it's pretty incredible. They pulled that off back in the day. And then 50% shots where it's like, this is just not good. In fact, we were watching it and my son, who is 7, goes, this looks fake. And we were watching a lot of stuff in these movies that he's just going along with it and not seeing issue. And then they have an Ewok on a speeder and it starts spinning slowly. And he's like, this looks really fake. I'm like, oh, the effects in general. He's like, no, that shot just looks stupid. He's 7 years old, turning into a movie critic already. So proud of the little guy. But that's a problem when you have shots that a 7-year-old is being like, that doesn't look. I mean, we're watching scenes in it where there's matte paintings behind them. And we're like, hey, son, look at it. There's a painting behind them. He's like, what? Oh, it's a paint. Oh, yeah, that is a painting. And then spinny stuff. He's like, that just looks bad. And 2 more negatives on this one will be specifically about the special edition and some of the final tweaks that they've done. This movie, to me, actually has the most egregious addition to the special edition. Of course, a ton of people hate the Han shot first one, and they've gone back and forth on the timing of the exact shot of all that. And I totally get the offense on that one. I don't think it's as egregious as the musical number that they added that just, it's just embarrassing. They've got a guy screaming, and it just feels out of place. And then he runs up to the camera and he's like, into the camera. He breaks the fourth wall of sorts inside of it. And it's shocking that that's in the movie. It's shocking that nobody went, you can't do that. This does not fit. If you want a bigger musical number, okay. I wouldn't have liked that. But breaking the fourth wall and doing something so cartoonish is and it's not even it's not even a character arc thing. You can see where he's debating as to what Han should and shouldn't do and the logic to it. You could justify it inside of this universe why in his mind Han should make a different choice. he was wrong, but you could see where he's coming from. Whereas guy screaming at the camera, this is just a bad idea. And then another one that's just baffling to me. In the Blu-ray edition, when they first put on Blu-ray, Lucas had to keep fiddling with things a little bit. So at the point in time where Vader picks up the Emperor, right before he does that, it's always been there. Vader's looking back and forth. And then he added in Vader saying, no, before he picks up the Emperor and throws him down the trash chute or whatever. And I'm just trying to wrap my brain around, what did he think was added? No one ever has watched that movie and been like, what is Vader thinking right now? Like, is he... is he thinking about a joke? Is he like no one has wondered. You didn't need to add in there, like, just make sure everybody knows he does not approve. What? That his action. It's a movie. It's visual. Show, don't tell. And you did show it. No one has ever been confused as to what Vader was thinking. And then he just adds a no. Whereas the dance number is the epitome of just terrible ideas that he added in, and like nobody told him no, like you can't do this. This one seems to be the epitome of just like he kind of lost it a little bit. Like he just was. You don't even know what he was thinking. There's no benefit to this. It's just worse storytelling. It only makes things worse because it doesn't. There's just no artistic merit, storytelling merit to adding no. And those two to me, I think, are just peak Lucas. He just couldn't stop meddling. And so he put things in there that were just the worst. Real quick, before I give you my final score on this one, tell me what you thought down below in the comment section. Let's have that lively discussion. If you can, let me know a little bit how old you are of sorts, what generation you're in. I think it informs how people talk about some of these movies a little bit, and I think it adds a layer of intrigue into the discussion for me. Also, I am reviewing all of these movies leading up to it. The playlist is right up here. This is the third part inside of it. If you're watching when I first released it, there's only 2 of them up there. But if you're watching in the future, they're all right up there. As I've mentioned throughout this video, this is the most flawed of the films in the original trilogy. There are a number of things that you can nitpick and a number of things inside of it that I think are just problems inside of it. But I think it lands the ship. The emotions you're supposed to feel, I think you feel them. The most important ones, the Vader, Luke stuff, that's what's really important. You feel all of that. I think the action in the finale is fantastic, that it's the right way of doing action where there's a story going along with the big action. So you care about these different people, you care about the characters. It's staged incredibly. Once again, we're seeing new and different things that we didn't see in the previous movies or on a different level. So the most important things that need to work do work. So despite the fact that it's got a lot of issues, I am very positive on this movie. For me, it's a B+ overall. It's a 9 out of 10 on the entertainment scale. And as the closing of a classic trilogy, it's still a must-watch. Not necessarily must-watch on the same level of the first 2 in the trilogy, but still, if you watch those 2 and you must watch those ones, you must watch this one as well, at least to join in on the conversation. If you want more content like this one, the rest of the reviews are right over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.